In the twilight of the Old West on film, a wave of forgotten westerns from the 1960s and 70s vanished into the desert of time. These were not the John Wayne blockbusters, but gritty independent marvels once buried under studio dust. What if you could saddle up and watch them all for free right now? The stories the studios buried have finally returned. Number 15, The Shooting, 1966. A haunting western that defied the genre. The Shooting began as a low-budget experiment filmed in the arid heat of Utah. Directed by Monte and starring a young Jack Nicholson, it rejected cowboy heroics for existential dread. The story follows two hired men who join a mysterious woman on a desert trek that becomes a slow descent into paranoia and violence. Audiences in 1966 were baffled. There was no gunfight glory, no clear villain, just silence and sand. Some whispered it was too strange, too European. Distributors refused wide release, claiming it would confuse American audiences who wanted clean shootouts, not psychological unease. Behind the scenes, Hellman shot on a shoestring with no permits, and crew members doubling as extras. The film's oppressive mood came from exhaustion, heat, and tension between Nicholson and co-star Warren Oates, whose friendship nearly collapsed during filming. The Shooting disappeared quickly, but decades later, film scholars called it the first true acid western, a surrealist vision of moral decay. Today it streams free on several classic film archives, proving that westerns could be as unsettling as any modern thriller. Like a mirage in the desert, it was misunderstood in its own time, but unforgettable once rediscovered. Number 14, Ride in the Whirlwind, 1966. Filmed back-to-back with The Shooting Ride. In the Whirlwind was another collaboration between Monte and Jack Nicholson, but this time, Nicholson wrote the script himself. The story follows three cowhands mistaken for outlaws hunted by a ruthless posse. It is a film about bad luck fear and the way violence swallows innocent men whole. Released to almost no fanfare, it was dumped into drive-ins and foreign markets without promotion. Critics ignored it. American International Pictures had no idea how to market a Western with no hero and no happy ending. Some theaters even billed it as a horror movie by mistake. During production, the crew lived on beans and slept in tents between takes. Nicholson's dialogue was rewritten daily to fit the barren landscape that seemed to echo back despair. The sound of the desert wind was recorded live because Hellman insisted on capturing authenticity even when it ruined takes. The result was a brutally honest portrait of isolation that predated the revisionist Western boom. For years, it was lost to poor distribution prints until it resurfaced in a European film archive in the 1990s. Now, available free online, it stands as an eerie companion piece to The Shooting. 2. All films that turned the Western inside out before anyone noticed. Number 13. Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here, 1969. When Robert Redford and Robert Blake starred in Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here, it was marketed as a chase film, but beneath the saddle lay a burning political statement. Set in 1909, the film told the tragic true story of a Native American fugitive hunted across the desert after killing a white man in self-defense. Director Abraham Polanski, a blacklisted filmmaker returning to Hollywood after decades in exile, filled the film with quiet rage. He used the manhunt as a metaphor for racial prejudice and moral hypocrisy in America. The studio expected a standard pursuit thriller, but Polanski delivered a condemnation of history itself. Censors were uneasy. Some states refused screenings, claiming it stirred racial division during a volatile era of civil rights protests. The controversy deepened when the film's bleak ending rejected the heroic tradition entirely. Redford's character, a lawman who doubts his own righteousness, walks away defeated. Behind the scenes, Polanski battled studio executives who wanted to cut scenes of indigenous suffering. He refused and nearly lost Final Cut. The result polarized critics, but later gained cult status as one of the most politically daring westerns of its time. Long unseen, except in poor television transfers, it is now resurfaced on several free streaming platforms, restored to its original color. Tell Them. Willie Boy Is Here is not just a western, it is an elegy for justice, a story once silenced that still asks who truly owns the land. Number 12. The Hired Hand, 1971. When Peter Fonda released The Hired Hand, it was not the Western audiences expected. Instead of gunslingers and revenge, it delivered silence, melancholy, and the slow decay of a man who left his family to wander the frontier. Fonda starred as a drifter, returning home after years on the trail, hoping for forgiveness from the wife he abandoned. The Hired Hand opened to confusion. Critics could not decide if it was genius or self-indulgence. Many viewers walked out. Some called it a hippie western, a poetic dream full of death and guilt. Fonda's decision to use slow motion, dissolves, and meditative pacing alienated distributors who wanted another Easy Rider. Instead, he gave them something like a moving elegy for the dying West. Behind the camera, the production was tense. Fonda and his cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond experimented with natural light, waiting for hours to catch the perfect golden hue at sunset. Crew members remembered entire days lost to clouds and dust storms. Universal Pictures panicked after the premiere and pulled it from theaters within weeks, claiming no one wanted a sad western about redemption. But time changed everything. The Hired Hand was rediscovered in the 1990s and hailed as a masterpiece of mood and introspection. Today you can watch it free on public archives and streaming services that host restored westerns. What once looked like a flop now feels like a requiem for freedom, a film where every gust of wind carries regret. Number 11, Chato's Land, 1972. Charles Bronson rarely played heroes, and in Chato's Land, he became something far more primal. Directed by Michael Winner, it told the brutal story of a half-Apache man hunted by a racist posse after killing a sheriff in self-defense. What followed was not a typical Western, but a revenge odyssey that mirrored America's own historical sins. When it premiered, audiences were shocked by the savagery. Critics accused it of being too violent, too bleak, too political. The Vietnam War had reached its height, and many saw the film as an allegory for the American military's brutality. Some theaters refused to show it, claiming it was anti-American propaganda. Behind the scenes, Winner pushed the cast to physical extremes. The desert temperatures soared past 100 degrees. Horses collapsed. Extras fainted. Bronson performed most of his own stunts, refusing to break character, even when injured. At one point, Winner and Bronson nearly came to blows over how graphic a scene should be. Censors trimmed sequences of torture and humiliation, but European prints remained intact and became underground hits. In later years, critics reappraised Chato's Land as one of the first revisionist westerns to confront racism head-on. It is now free to stream in many regions, uncut and unflinching, a film that reminds us that revenge stories often expose the cruelty of those who seek it. Number 10. Valdez is Coming, 1971. Burt Lancaster's Valdez is Coming was dismissed at first as another dusty revenge tale, but those who looked closer found a haunting story of guilt, justice, and dignity in a world built on cruelty. Lancaster plays a humble Mexican-American lawman forced into violence after being humiliated by a wealthy rancher's men. The film's release was turbulent. Test audiences expected gunfights, but got a slow burn about moral debt. Some distributors called it too sympathetic to minorities, too political for small-town audiences. Censors in parts of the South reportedly demanded cuts to scenes showing the ranchers mocking Valdez's heritage. Director Edwin Sharon fought back, insisting the film's purpose was to show strength through restraint. Lancaster gave one of his most subdued performances, refusing to overact the pain of a man stripped of honor. The crew endured grueling desert conditions near Tucson, Arizona. Equipment broke down daily, sand destroyed cameras, and shooting was delayed for weeks. Upon release, critics split. Some admired its stoicism, others found it dull. But decades later, it earned cult admiration for being one of the earliest westerns to openly address racial injustice and personal redemption. Now freely available on several classic movie platforms, Valdez is Coming stands as a quiet thunderclap of defiance, a film that refused to glorify vengeance and instead asked what a man's soul is truly worth. Number 9. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. Ulzana's Raid was no ordinary cavalry tale. Directed by Robert Aldrich, it turned the frontier into a mirror of moral collapse. Burt Lancaster played a weathered scout leading soldiers through Apache territory to capture a brutal raider named Ulzana. What looked like a standard pursuit soon became a meditation on cruelty and the futility of conquest. When the film premiered, it shocked critics with its realism. Violence was not glamorized but shown as ugly and endless. Audiences accustomed to clean westerns recoiled from the brutality. Some accused the film of being anti-military. Others called it a coded allegory for the Vietnam War, where young soldiers were sent to fight enemies they did not understand. Censors demanded cuts to graphic scenes of frontier atrocities. In several European countries, it was banned for excessive violence, while in the United States, Universal Pictures quietly reduced its release after protests from veterans groups. Behind the scenes, Aldrich clashed with the studio over Tone refusing to remove the scenes that made viewers uncomfortable. The film's authenticity came from exhaustion. The cast spent weeks in the Arizona desert wearing heavy cavalry gear under scorching heat. Lancaster performed with quiet dignity, portraying a man who knew that victory meant nothing. Over time, Ulzana's raid found its audience among critics who hailed it as one of the last great anti-westerns. Today it streams freely on multiple archives and digital platforms. Its raw honesty feels more relevant than ever. Ulzana's raid remains a warning from a fading era when westerns dared to question the myth of heroism. It whispers that even in victory, something human is always lost. Number 8. Lawman, 1971. Before revisionist westerns became fashionable, Lawman fired the first warning shot. Directed by Michael Winner and starring Burt Lancaster, it told the story of a marshal who rides into a small town to arrest a group of cowhands for murder. What follows is not justice but obsession. The film refuses to give its hero redemption. Audiences expected a familiar tale of courage. Instead, they got cold efficiency. Lancaster's marshal kills without hesitation, treating law enforcement as holy duty. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece of moral ambiguity. Others found it disturbingly joyless. In an era when the Vietnam conflict was tearing the nation apart, Lawman felt like a parable for authority gone mad. During production, tensions ran high. Winner demanded real gunfire, sound effects, and used squibs that injured stuntmen. The town set was reused from older westerns, and its decay showed on camera, adding a grim realism. Lancaster grew frustrated by the director's obsession with control. Their arguments became legendary, with crew members forced to separate them more than once. When it reached theaters, censors warned about the film's cold brutality. Some regional distributors refused to screen it, fearing audiences would reject a hero so ruthless. Yet, decades later, critics recognized its brilliance. It predicted the anti-hero era that would dominate cinema. Lawman is now freely available online, and its stark photography and moral unease feel more contemporary than ever. In the silence after the gunfire, Lancaster's weary face tells the truth. No badge can purify the human heart. Number 7. The Ballad of Cable Hogue, 1970. After directing violent epics like The Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah surprised everyone with The Ballad of Cable Hogue, a tender elegy disguised as a comedy. Jason Robards played a desert drifter who finds water in the wilderness and builds a stagecoach stop, hoping to start a new life before the modern world overtakes him. The film opened to confusion. Critics who expected bloodshed were met with warmth, poetry, and tragedy. Some theaters advertised it as a love story. Others called it a parody. Audiences stayed away. The studio buried it quickly, believing Peckinpah had gone soft after his controversial reputation for on-screen carnage. Behind the scenes, Peckinpah was anything but soft. The production was chaotic and nearly broke its budget when flash floods destroyed sets. Peckinpah fought with Warner Brothers over the ending, refusing to cut the scene of Cable's lonely death. Jason Robards and Stella Stevens both recalled the director alternating between kindness and fury, sometimes rewriting entire scenes in the desert sand. Years later, critics reappraised the film as Peckinpah's most personal work, a lament for decency dying in a changing America. It carries humor and heartbreak in equal measure. The Ballad of Cable Hogue is now available to stream for free and has become beloved among cinephiles as the director's hidden masterpiece. Its message lingers like dust. At sunset time, always wins, but kindness still leaves footprints. Number 6. Jeremiah Johnson, 1972. When Sidney Pollack's Jeremiah Johnson rode into theaters, it looked like a simple mountain man story, but it carried the spirit of rebellion and solitude that defined the era. Robert Redford played Johnson, a disillusioned soldier who turns his back on civilization to live alone in the Rocky Mountains. The wilderness becomes both sanctuary and punishment. The film's tone was haunting. Audiences who expected gunfights got poetry and snow. It became a quiet hit, but also a divisive one. Some critics accused it of glorifying violence, while others praised it for exposing the futility of revenge. The story follows Johnson's transformation from peaceful hermit to reluctant killer after a tragic massacre. Each act of vengeance cuts deeper into his soul. During filming, the crew faced brutal conditions in Utah's Wasatch Mountains. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Horses refused to move through the snow. Redford lived in a cabin for weeks to prepare for the role and nearly suffered frostbite during one blizzard scene. Studio executives doubted the film's appeal, claiming it was too slow and mournful. Censors in some countries questioned its depiction of Native Americans, yet Pollock refused to simplify the conflict. His goal was realism, not propaganda. The film's success abroad shocked everyone, proving audiences were ready for westerns that questioned the myth of taming the land. Today, Jeremiah Johnson streams freely across many classic platforms. Its stillness, its aching beauty, and Redford's haunted eyes remind viewers that freedom always carries a cost. It is not a western of heroes, but of men who disappear into legend because they no longer belong anywhere else. Number 5. Monte Walsh. 1970. Monte Walsh was a farewell letter to the cowboy myth. Starring Lee Marvin and Jack Palance, it told the story of two aging ranch hands watching the frontier vanish beneath railroads and business suits. Director William Fraker captured the melancholy of change, the death of the open range, and the loneliness of men out of time. When it premiered, the film drew modest crowds. Critics admired it, but audiences ignored it. They wanted adventure, not elegy. Some theaters pulled it within weeks. The marketing department tried to sell it as an action film, but the story had no villains, only time itself. Behind the scenes, Marvin insisted on authenticity. He performed most of his stunts despite injuries from earlier films. Fraker used real cowboys as extras to preserve realism. The production shot under harsh winter winds in Arizona, which destroyed sound equipment daily. Jack Palance later called it the hardest shoot of his life. Monte Walsh was not banned, but it was buried by neglect. It became one of those movies that critics whispered about as the Western that said goodbye to itself. In later years, it found renewed love on television and streaming archives. Now, freely available to watch, it remains one of the most heartbreaking Westerns ever made. Monte Walsh does not end with a gunfight, but with silence and the sound of a saddle creaking in the wind. The dream of the West dies quietly, and that is what makes it unforgettable. Number 4. The Great Silence. 1968. In the winter of 1968, Italian director Sergio Corbucci created something audiences had never seen. A Western filmed entirely in snow, where morality froze with the landscape. The Great Silence starred Jean-Louis Trintignant as a mute gunslinger hired to protect outlaws from a sadistic bounty hunter played by Klaus Kinski. The film defied every convention. There were no blue skies, no triumph, only despair. Censors in Italy and Germany recoiled at its violence and nihilism. The shocking ending where evil triumphs was considered unfit for release. Distributors demanded an alternate cut with a happy ending, but Corbucci refused. As a result, the film was shelved in several countries for years. Production was equally grueling. The crew battled avalanches and minus 20-degree temperatures in the Dolomites. Horses slipped on ice, actors fell ill, and Kinski nearly quit after frostbite on his hands. Corbucci insisted that the frozen setting symbolized moral decay and silence in the face of injustice. When The Great Silence finally reached audiences in France, it became an underground legend. Quentin Tarantino later called it one of his greatest influences. Long-lost prints were rediscovered in the 1990s, leading to restoration and free screenings worldwide. Watching it today feels like staring into the heart of hopelessness and beauty at once. The Great Silence is not just a Western, it is a dirge for humanity itself. The snow never stops falling, and justice never arrives. Number 3. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. 1973. Sam Peckinpah returned to the frontier one last time with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and what he made was less a western than an autopsy of legend. Starring James Coburn and Chris Christopherson, the film tells of an aging lawman ordered to kill his old friend, now an outlaw. Every frame breathes the death of the Old West and the betrayal of friendship. From the start, chaos ruled production. Peckinpah fought with MGM executives over control. He drank heavily and rewrote scenes in fury. Studio heads hated his slow lyrical tone and demanded cuts to speed the story. In the end, they butchered the film, releasing a shortened version that critics called incoherent. The real vision stayed unseen for decades. The controversy only deepened its mystique. Peckinpah filled the film with Bob Dylan's mournful songs, including Knockin' on Heaven's Door, recorded in a single take on set. Censors objected to the grim violence, but the director refused to soften it. He wanted the audience to feel the exhaustion of men who knew their time was over. For years, it drifted between bootlegs and rumor until a restored director's cut emerged. Now, it can be seen in its full tragic beauty, free on classic archives. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is not just a movie. It is the funeral march of an entire genre. Its last gunshot echoes into silence like a heartbeat fading away. Number 2. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. 1962. John Ford's. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance arrived when the Western was already aging, but its message cut deeper than any gunfight. Starring James Stewart and John Wayne, it told the story of a senator haunted by a secret that his fame was built on another man's sacrifice. Though praised today as a masterpiece, its release divided audiences. Many expected sweeping landscapes and cavalry charges. Instead, Ford gave them black and white photography and moral confusion. Some critics claimed he had grown cynical. Others saw a final confession from the director, who once built the myth of the West, and now dismantled it before our eyes. Behind the scenes, tension simmered. Ford pushed Stewart to emotional limits and mocked Wayne's aging image to draw real bitterness. He filmed on cramped sets instead of wide plains, making the story feel claustrophobic, as though the walls of myth were closing in. Censors took issue with its melancholy and political undertones, but Ford refused to alter a frame. The line, "When the legend becomes fact print, the legend became prophetic." For decades, the film vanished from mainstream rotation, only to reappear in restored editions, now streaming free on classic movie channels. Its relevance has only grown in an era that questions heroism itself. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance reminds us that truth and legend cannot coexist forever, and sometimes the greatest lie is the one a nation tells itself. Number 1. Once Upon a Time in the West. 1968. When Sergio Leone released Once Upon a Time in the West, critics dismissed it as self-indulgent, but history proved them wrong. With Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, Claudia Cardinale, and Jason Robards, it became the ultimate elegy to the Western myth. Leone's camera moved like a ghost, lingering on dust, wind, and death. The film's opening sequence alone redefined cinema, nearly 10 minutes of silence broken only by the creak of a windmill and the distant whistle of a train. When Fonda, the quintessential good guy, arrived on screen as a child, murderer audiences gasped. Paramount executives panicked, believing American viewers would reject their hero-turned-villain. They cut almost 30 minutes from Leone's version and released it quietly in drive-ins. The film flopped in the United States, but became a sensation in Europe, where audiences embraced its operatic pace and haunting music by Ennio Morricone. For years, American prints were incomplete, missing crucial context. The controversy made it legendary. Film schools later called it a visual symphony. Restoration in the 1990s revealed Leone's full vision, now freely available online. Every gunshot becomes a note, every death a requiem. Once Upon a Time in the West closes the era with finality. It is not a Western about men and revenge, it is about time, memory, and the ghost of progress. Watching it feels like saying goodbye to the dream of the frontier forever. These forgotten Westerns remind us that the frontier never really vanished. It just rode beyond the horizon, waiting to be rediscovered. Each film carries a piece of history buried beneath dust and celluloid. Which of these lost treasures will you watch first? Saddle up in the comments below and subscribe for more stories the world forgot.